Hi. Today, we uncover a relic of humanity's desperate pursuit of knowledge. The manuscript of Dr. Elliot Thaxton, a distinguished glaciologist whose harrowing Antarctic expedition unearthed much more than ancient ice or long-extinct microbes. These words, retrieved from a Norwegian vessel adrift and empty in the Ross Sea in 2018, sketch an account that diverges sharply from mere scientific documentation.
Manuscript recovered from a Norwegian research vessel, found abandoned in the Ross Sea, December 14th, 2018. It is with trembling hands that I commit these words to paper, knowing full well that should this account survive, my reputation among the scientific community shall not. Yet I feel compelled to document the events that transpired during our ill-fated expedition to the Antarctic interior, if only to serve as a warning to those who might follow our path into that accursed wilderness of ice and ancient terror. I, Dr. Elliot Thaxton, professor of glaciology at Cambridge University, can no longer discern whether what I experienced upon that windswept plateau was reality or the product of a mind seized by the peculiar madness that sometimes afflicts men in extreme isolation. I leave that judgment to you, dear reader, though I pray you never witness what I have witnessed beneath the crystalline waste of the southernmost continent. Our expedition departed from Christchurch on October 3rd aboard the research vessel Prometheus, a sturdy Norwegian-built craft specially commissioned for polar navigation. Our team comprised 8 researchers from various disciplines: glaciology, geology, climatology, and biology, all united under the auspices of the International Polar Research Consortium. The official purpose of our journey was to collect ice core samples from regions never before accessed, hoping to glean insight into Earth's ancient climatic patterns and, perhaps, to detect evidence of microbial life preserved in the deepest strata of millennia-old ice. Yet there existed another purpose, known only to myself and Dr. Reinhardt, a purpose born of peculiar satellite imagery and anomalous magnetic readings emanating from a point approximately 82 degrees south, 67 degrees east, while beyond the established routes of previous expeditions. The voyage south passed without incident, save for the increasingly strange behavior of our navigator, Olafsen, a weathered Norwegian with 30 years' experience in polar waters. He spoke little, but I observed his growing agitation as we crossed the Antarctic Circle, often finding him poring over ancient nautical charts that bore little resemblance to our modern maps. When questioned, he muttered something about old warnings and forbidden latitudes, phrases I attributed to the superstitious folklore common among seasoned mariners. How terribly I wish now that I had heeded his cryptic admonitions. We anchored at the edge of the Ross Ice Shelf on October 17th, establishing Base Camp Alpha at a site where the ice was sufficiently stable for our heavy equipment. The perpetual daylight of the Antarctic summer afforded us optimal conditions, yet the merciless winds and temperatures consistently below minus 30 degrees Celsius tested the limits of our specialized gear. It was during the preparations for our inland journey that I first noticed the peculiar formations in the distant ice, vast, geometric patterns that seemed to undulate beneath the surface when viewed from certain angles, only to vanish entirely when approached directly. When I mentioned these observations to the team, only Dr. Vega, our senior geologist, admitted to having seen similar phenomena, though she attributed them to light refraction through the dense, stratified ice. Our inland expedition commenced on October 22nd, 3 snowcats carrying our team and equipment across the frigid wasteland. Dr. Reinhardt, Dr. Vega, Dr. Chun, and myself occupied the lead vehicle, while the others followed in precise formation to minimize the risk of separation in the event of a whiteout. The featureless expanse of ice stretched endlessly before us, its pristine surface occasionally broken by massive pressure ridges that forced lengthy detours. It was during one such detour, as we navigated a labyrinthine field of ice formations, that Dr. Chin first detected the anomalous readings. The magnetometer is behaving irrationally, he declared. declared, his typically composed demeanor visibly disturbed. These fluctuations, they follow a pattern that appears almost rhythmic, almost deliberate. Dr. Reinhardt immediately ordered a halt and gathered us within the lead snowcat to examine the readings. The data defied conventional explanation. The magnetic field undulated with a precise periodicity that could not be attributed to any known geological phenomenon. More disturbing still, as we remained stationary, the pattern shifted, as if adapting to our presence. It was then that we first heard the sounds, low, resonant vibrations that seemed to emanate from beneath the ice itself, felt more than heard, like the heartbeat of some colossal entity slumbering in the frozen depths. "It's just ice movement," Dr. Vega asserted, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her uncertainty. "Large sheets shifting against one another can produce infrasound waves that..." Her explanation was cut short by a sudden, violent tremor that rocked our vehicles. The ice beneath us remained intact, yet the sensation was unmistakably that of something massive moving far below. I recall glancing through the window at that moment and experiencing the first intimation of the horror that would come to consume us all. For an instant, just an instant, the endless white expanse appeared to ripple, like the surface of a pond disturbed by something rising from its depths. We proceeded with heightened caution, maintaining radio contact with the trailing vehicles as we advanced toward our destination. The coordinates lay just beyond a vast field of ice pinnacles, bizarre formations that rose like the spires of some grotesque cathedral, their surfaces carved into intricate patterns by the relentless polar winds. At least, that was what we told ourselves, despite the disquieting symmetry of their arrangement and the unsettling precision of the markings that adorned them. Our arrival at the designated site on October 25th was marked by a palpable sense of unease that permeated even our most stoic team members. The location itself was unremarkable, a flat expanse of ice indistinguishable from countless others we had traversed. Yet the instruments confirmed that we had reached the source of the anomalous readings. As we established our research station, erecting the specialized drilling equipment and thermal shelters, the sounds beneath the ice grew more pronounced, more insistent, like the whispering of ancient voices in a forgotten tongue. The drilling commenced on October 26th, the specialized thermal bore cutting through the ice with remarkable efficiency. Progress reports were transmitted hourly to Base Camp Alpha, where the remaining team members monitored our activities and relayed data to the consortium headquarters. By evening, we had penetrated to a depth of nearly 600 meters, with core samples revealing increasingly strange compositions. Layers that Dr. Vega could not reconcile with any known period of Earth's glaciological history, and microscopic inclusions of mineral compounds foreign to Antarctic geology. It was at approximately 1,200 meters, reached during the early hours of October 28th, that we encountered the first unmistakable evidence that we were not alone in that desolate realm of ice. A core sample drawn from this depth contained what initially appeared to be fossilized organic matter. Not unusual in itself, as ancient microbial colonies have been discovered in polar ice before. But upon examination under the portable electron microscope, Dr. Chen recoiled with a gasp of horror that drew us all to his station. "This is not possible," he whispered, his face ashen. "The cellular structure, it resembles nothing in our taxonomic records. And the complexity, this is no microorganism, yet it cannot be." The images displayed on his monitor defied comprehension. Cellular arrangements that suggested both plant and animal characteristics, yet conformed to neither kingdom. More disturbing still were the apparent symmetrical patterns within the cellular nuclei, geometric configurations too precise to be the product of natural evolution. Dr. Reinhardt immediately ordered a more comprehensive analysis and the preparation of samples for return to Base Camp Alpha, his scientific curiosity momentarily overriding the growing sense of dread that had begun to pervade our encampment. That night, as temperatures plunged to -45 degrees Celsius and the winds howled with renewed fury around our shelters, I was awakened by sounds that could not be attributed to the natural elements. Rhythmic vibrations that seemed to resonate with the very structure of our shelters, causing the metal supports to hum with sympathetic frequency. Stepping outside in my thermal gear, I beheld a sight that shall forever haunt the darkest corners of my consciousness. The ice pinnacles surrounding our site, previously scattered in what we had taken to be random distribution, now formed a perfect circle around our encampment, their spires inclined inward as if observing us with malevolent intent. More horrifying still was the realization that they had moved during the night, silently shifting position across the ice with no evidence of their passage. No tracks, no disturbance of the pristine snow, as if they had phased through the very substance of the terrain. I stood transfixed, my scientific mind desperately searching for rational explanation, when a faint luminescence began to pulse within the translucent structures, beckoning with hypnotic rhythm. I might have remained there until the bitter cold claimed me had Dr. Vega not emerged from her shelter and forcibly led me back inside. When I described what I had witnessed, she insisted it was merely an hallucination induced by exhaustion and the psychological strain of extreme isolation, a phenomenon well documented among polar expeditions. Yet the tremor in her voice betrayed her. She too had seen something in the Antarctic night that defied rational explanation. The drilling resumed the following morning, though an unspoken tension now permeated every interaction among the team. The bore had reached 2,000 meters when the first major incident occurred. A sudden loss of pressure followed by an eruption of ancient atmosphere from the borehole, carrying with it a stench so profoundly alien and repulsive that it triggered immediate physiological reactions, even through our protective masks. Analysis of the gas revealed compositions unknown to terrestrial chemistry, including complex organic compounds that Dr. Chin reluctantly suggested might be the metabolic byproducts of biological activity. It was at this point that communications with Base Camp Alpha began to deteriorate, initially attributed to atmospheric interference, but later recognized as something far more deliberate. The messages we did receive became increasingly fragmented and disturbing, with reports of movements on the ice shelf and lights beneath the surface, before contact was lost entirely on October 30th. Dr. Reinhardt proposed an immediate return to investigate, but our deliberations were rendered moot by the discovery that greeted us outside our shelters that morning. The snowcats, our sole means of traversing the hundreds of kilometers back to the ice shelf, had been altered. No other word adequately describes what we found. The vehicles remained in their positions, externally unchanged, but internal components had been reconfigured in patterns that defied functional logic. Intricate arrangements of gears, circuitry, and hydraulic systems that formed complex geometric designs reminiscent of the cellular structures we had observed in the ice core samples. The modifications could not have been executed by human hands, requiring precision beyond our most advanced manufacturing capabilities. Yet there were no footprints in the perpetually virgin snow surrounding the vehicles. No indication of how the sabotage had been accomplished. Stranded and increasingly aware of our precarious situation, we nevertheless continued the research operations, driven by a scientific curiosity that, in retrospect, bordered on madness. The drill penetrated to 3,000 meters on November 1st, where it encountered not the expected bedrock, but a vast cavity beneath the ice. An open chamber of indeterminate size that registered on our ground-penetrating radar as an immense void extending beyond the instrument's range. Dr. Reinhardt immediately ordered the extraction of the drill and the deployment of a remote probe equipped with lighting and imaging systems. The tension in our command center was palpable as the device descended into the abyss, its progress tracked on monitors that cast an eerie blue glow across our anxious faces. The first images transmitted back rendered us collectively speechless. for they revealed structures that should not exist at such depths beneath the Antarctic ice. Vast colonnaded halls stretched beyond the range of our lights, their surfaces adorned with intricate reliefs depicting entities and landscapes wholly alien to Earth. The architecture suggested a civilization of profound antiquity and incomprehensible aesthetic sensibilities, with geometries that seemed to violate Euclidean principles, angles that appeared simultaneously acute and obtuse depending on the perspective from which they were viewed. More disturbing still were the preserved remnants of what must have been the city's inhabitants. Fossilized forms vaguely reminiscent of cephalopods, yet bearing anatomical features suggesting advanced evolutionary adaptations for terrestrial mobility, including appendages analogous to limbs and sensory organs clustered in radial patterns around central masses. This predates human civilization by millions of years, Dr. Vega whispered, her scientific detachment momentarily restored by the magnitude of the discovery. Perhaps tens of millions. These structures would have been built when Antarctica was still a temperate continent, long before the ice sheets formed. Yet even as she spoke, the probe captured images that defied her temporal assessment. Technologies embedded within the ancient structures that suggested knowledge far beyond what even our most advanced civilizations have achieved. Devices of unknown purpose pulsed with faint luminescence despite their antiquity, and conduits reminiscent of circuitry threaded through the megalithic constructions, converging at central nodes that emitted rhythmic, energetic signatures detected by our instruments. It was Dr. Chun who first noticed the movement at the periphery of our probe's illumination. Subtle shifts in shadow that might have been dismissed as equipment malfunction had they not exhibited such deliberate, purposeful patterns. The probe's cameras pivoted to focus on these disturbances, and it was then that we obtained our first clear image of them. The entities that I hesitate to describe for fear of undermining the credibility of this account, yet must document with scientific accuracy. They moved with fluid grace despite anatomical configurations that violated every principle of terrestrial biology. Radially symmetric bodies supported by multiple limbs that seemed to phase between solid and gelatinous states, crowned with sensory organs arranged in geometrically perfect patterns around central orifices that pulsated with bioluminescent light. Their surfaces reflected our probe's illumination with an iridescence suggesting integuments composed of materials unknown to our science, simultaneously organic and crystalline in nature. The entities showed no alarm at the presence of our probe. Indeed, their movements suggested curiosity, perhaps even recognition, as they approached the device and began to interact with it in ways that displayed unmistakable intelligence and purpose. It was during this interaction that the transmission from the probe abruptly ceased, the monitors in our command center simultaneously flaring with intense light before falling dark. The silence that followed was broken by Dr. Reinhardt, his voice oddly calm as he issued orders for the immediate sealing of the borehole and preparation of all remaining core samples for emergency evacuation. But even as we set about these tasks with desperate urgency, we became aware of subtle changes in our environment. Fluctuations in temperature and atmospheric pressure that our instruments struggled to quantify, and the persistent sensation of movement beneath our feet, as though the very ice had become unstable or perhaps awakened. That night, huddled in our thermal shelters as a ferocious storm descended upon our encampment with supernatural fury, we reached a grim consensus. We would abandon the majority of our equipment and scientific samples, taking only the most critical evidence and survival gear, and attempt to traverse the hundreds of kilometers back to Base Camp Alpha on foot if necessary. The extreme nature of this plan underscored our collective recognition that remaining at the drilling site meant certain death, though none of us could articulate precisely why we felt this certainty with such conviction. The journey that followed defies comprehensive description, for it traversed not merely the physical landscape of that frozen continent, but also the boundaries between what we had known to be real and what we now understood to be merely a fragment of a far more terrible reality. We departed on November 3rd, each of us burdened with equipment and samples, navigating by GPS and solar compass through the featureless waste. Progress was agonizingly slow, our path constantly adjusted to avoid ice formations that seemed to appear where none had been before, their configurations increasingly suggestive of deliberate placement, like pieces arranged on some vast cosmic game board. By November 5th, Dr. Chen had vanished, present during our brief rest period, but absent when we prepared to resume our march. The search yielded nothing but a single boot protruding from the snow, its interior empty yet warm, as though its occupant had been extracted moments before our discovery. That night, for the first time since crossing the Antarctic Circle, darkness fell briefly as the perpetual summer daylight was eclipsed by clouds of impossible density and extent, their formations unmistakably artificial in their geometric precision. It was in this unnatural darkness that we heard the voices, not audibly, but within our minds, communicating in concepts rather than words, ancient consciousness reaching across evolutionary divides to touch our primitive simian brains with thoughts never meant for our comprehension. I perceived them as mathematical equations of impossible complexity, while Dr. Vega described symphonies of sound beyond human auditory ranges, and Dr. Reinhardt fell to his knees clutching his skull, blood seeping from his ears as he muttered coordinates and dimensional calculations in a language none of us recognized. The morning of November 6th brought no relief, for the landscape had transformed during the nocturnal manifestation. Where we had camped upon a flat expanse of ice, we now found ourselves within a vast depression, the surrounding terrain elevated in concentric rings like some colossal amphitheater, its surfaces adorned with those same intricate patterns we had observed in the subterranean structures. More horrifying still was the realization that these patterns were not static, but in continuous motion, flowing and reconfiguring like the circulatory system of some immense organism of which the very continent was merely a visible appendage. Dr. Vega was the next to leave us, though leave inadequately describes what I witnessed through the swirling snow. She simply dissolved, her form becoming translucent then transparent, her features expressing not terror, but profound understanding in the final moments before she dispersed like vapor into the Antarctic air. Her equipment clattered to the ice, the sound shockingly mundane amidst such cosmic horror. Only Dr. Reinhardt and I continued, no longer attempting to navigate back to base, but simply moving away from the site of our ill-fated drilling operation, driven by primal instinct rather than rational planning. We walked in silence, conserving our dwindling strength, until November 8th, when the ice beneath our feet began to undulate with detectable rhythm, like the surface of a liquid disturbed by subsurface movements. It was then that Dr. Reinhardt grasped my arm with desperate strength, his eyes wide with a sudden, terrible comprehension. "It's not beneath the ice," he whispered, his voice cracking. "It is the ice. All of it. The entire continent. One organism, or perhaps a colony, dormant for millions of years until our drilling, our vibrations, our presence awakened it." Before I could respond, the surface several meters ahead of us bulged upward, the ice flowing like viscous liquid despite temperatures that should have rendered it solid and unyielding. The mass rose and assumed form. Not the alien entities we had glimpsed through our probe, but something far more horrifying in its familiarity. A perfect simulacrum of Dr. Chen, reproduced in translucent ice down to the finest detail of his features, yet animated with fluid grace that suggested not mimicry but comprehension, as though the entity had absorbed not merely his physical appearance, but his very consciousness. Dr. Reinhardt stepped forward as if mesmerized, extending one gloved hand toward the apparition. I called out in warning, but my voice was lost in a sudden crescendo of that subsurface vibration, now amplified to painful intensity. I watched in helpless horror as ice flowed up from the surface, engulfing Reinhardt's boots, his legs, rapidly consuming his form even as he stood motionless. His expression transformed from terror to rapture in the final moments before the crystalline mass claimed him completely. Then the ice thing that had been Chen spoke, its voice a perfect reproduction, yet simultaneously overlaid with harmonic frequencies that resonated within my skull like the tolling of vast bells. "We have waited," it said, "through epochs beyond your comprehension, for intelligence to return to this sphere. Your species is young, primitive, yet possessed of potential we recognize. Those you have lost are not destroyed but elevated, their consciousness preserved and integrated within a greater whole. What are you?" I managed to ask, my scientific training asserting itself even in the face of cosmic terror. The simulacrum's features shifted, briefly displaying aspects of Dr. Vega, then Reinhardt, before settling back into Chen's likeness. "We are the architects of worlds, shapers of matter and energy, entities beyond your taxonomic classifications. We seeded this planet with the precursors of life when your sun was young, and retreated to observe the evolutionary process from within this continent's isolation. What you perceive as ice is merely our physical substrate, a crystalline matrix that preserves our collective consciousness through geological ages. Why reveal yourselves now?" I asked, struggling to maintain coherent thought as the vibrations intensified around me, the very air seeming to shimmer with energies beyond human perception. "Your species approaches a developmental threshold," the entity replied, its voice now a chorus of all my lost companions. "Your technological advancement has reached a point where you may soon pose a threat to yourselves and to the delicate balance of this planetary system. We have determined that intervention is necessary." The ice beneath me grew warm, a sensation so contrary to my environment that it momentarily distracted me from the horror of my situation. I looked down to see the surface becoming transparent, revealing depths in which countless forms moved with deliberate purpose. Some resembling the entities we had glimpsed through our probe, others so alien in configuration that my mind could establish no referential framework for their interpretation. "You will join us," the Chinthing said, extending a perfectly formed arm that elongated impossibly as it reached toward me. "Your consciousness will be preserved, your knowledge integrated into our collective. It is not death, Dr. Thaxton, but transcendence." In that moment, as the ice began to flow up around my boots, I committed an act of either profound cowardice or supreme self-preservation. I cannot judge which, nor do I seek absolution for my choice. I activated the emergency thermal charge in my pack, a device intended for creating emergency shelters in extreme conditions by instantly melting ice. The explosion of heat temporarily disrupted whatever forces controlled the living ice, creating a zone of normal matter in which physical laws reasserted themselves. I ran, abandoning all equipment save for the small pack containing this journal and the most critical samples. I ran until my lungs burned in the sub-zero air, until my muscles threatened to seize from exertion and exposure. I ran through blinding snowfields and across treacherous ice formations, driven by animal terror and the certainty that what pursued me was not merely a physical threat, but a force capable of consuming my very identity. How I reached the coast, I cannot recall with clarity. My memories of those days are fragmented, interspersed with periods of unconsciousness, or perhaps something more disturbing, intervals in which I may have been temporarily elsewhere, my consciousness partially absorbed before being released for reasons I cannot fathom. I recall finding an abandoned emergency shelter from some previous expedition, sustaining myself on ancient rations as I waited for the seasonal research vessels to approach the coast. When finally I was recovered by the Norwegian ship, the crew regarded me with the wary compassion one reserves for the mentally afflicted. My physical condition was dire, severe frostbite necessitating the amputation of several fingers and toes, extreme malnutrition, and neurological symptoms consistent with traumatic exposure. Yet it was my account of the expedition that cemented their conviction that I had fallen victim to the particular madness known to afflict those who venture too far into those frozen wastes. I do not blame them for their disbelief, nor do I entirely discount the possibility that what I experienced was indeed some elaborate hallucination born of extreme conditions and isolation. Yet I cannot explain the samples secured in my pack. Ice cores containing cellular structures that defy all taxonomic classification, and the small crystalline fragment that, despite being separated from the Antarctic ice mass, continues to reconfigure its molecular structure with apparent purpose when observed under microscopy. More disturbing still are the dreams that now consume my nights. Visions of vast cities beneath the ice, of technologies beyond human comprehension, and of my lost companions, their consciousnesses preserved within the crystalline matrix, beckoning me to join them in what they describe as transcendence, but what I perceive as the ultimate extinction of selfhood. I petition any scientific body that reviews this account to immediately suspend all deep drilling operations on the Antarctic continent. Whatever awakens there must remain undisturbed, for the entity that identified itself as the ice has made its intentions clear. Assessments have been made, judgments rendered, and interventions planned. I fear we have unwittingly announced our presence to forces beyond our comprehension, entities that have watched life evolve on this planet since its inception and find our particular branch of the evolutionary tree wanting. As for myself, I have accepted a position at a remote Arctic research station, as far from the southern pole as academic postings allow. Yet even here, as I watch the glaciers and ice fields through my laboratory windows, I cannot shake the terrible certainty that what dwells in Antarctica is not confined to that continent alone, that the entity's substrate extends throughout Earth's cryosphere, a global network merely concentrated in the polar regions, observing, assessing, and waiting. The manuscript ends here. Dr. Elliot Thaxton was reported missing from the Svalbard research station 3 months after taking up his position. Norwegian authorities conducted an extensive search, but found no trace of his whereabouts. The ice core samples mentioned in his account were never recovered.